At 4:47 a.m. on March 4, 1944, Staff Sergeant William Bill Carter stood beside the left fuel tank of a P-51 Mustang at RAF Leiston in England, watching his pilot prepare for a mission he couldn't complete. The pilot was Captain Daniel Reynolds, 27 years old, 14 combat missions, 8 confirmed kills. The 8th Air Force had ordered him to escort B-17 bombers all the way to Berlin. Reynolds would run out of fuel 200 miles short of the target. Carter had been fueling and maintaining P-51 Mustangs for 11 months. He knew the aircraft inside and out. Single-seat fighter, liquid-cooled Merlin engine. Fastest thing in the European sky, dominant in a dogfight, lethal in a dive unmatched below 25,000 feet. But the P-51 had one fatal limitation that was killing American bomber crews every single day. It couldn't reach Berlin. The numbers were unforgiving. A P-51 Mustang carried 269 gallons of fuel across internal and drop tanks. At combat cruise settings, that gave it a maximum range of roughly 850 miles round trip. Enough to reach Frankfurt, enough to cover raids over France, enough to get partway into Germany. Berlin was 1,100 miles from England. Round trip. That 250-mile gap was a killing field. American doctrine said P-51s would escort bombers as far as fuel allowed, then turn back. The B-17s would continue alone, unprotected, into the teeth of German interceptors and flak batteries. The Luftwaffe knew exactly where the escorts turned back. They waited, and they slaughtered bomber crews by the hundreds. The 8th Air Force had lost 127 heavy bombers in the past 4 weeks. Most were shot down after their fighter escorts ran dry and peeled away. The bomber crews called it going naked into Germany. Pilots came back with stories of FW-190s and BF-109s circling just beyond P-51 range, waiting like wolves. Carter had watched too many bombers leave and not return. Good men, most younger than him. They climbed into B-17s at dawn, and by afternoon, ground crews were boxing their personal effects. The briefing officers said the problem was unavoidable. Range is a design limitation, they'd say. We're doing everything we can. External tank modifications take time. Engineering is working on it. But Carter knew better. The problem wasn't the tanks. It was what they put in them. The P-51's Packard V1650 Merlin engine was rated for 100-octane aviation gasoline, standard fuel across the Army Air Force. The fuel provided reliable performance, safe combustion temperatures, predictable engine wear. But Carter had done the math. The Merlin wasn't running at maximum potential. It was running at maximum safe potential. There was a difference. Pre-war, Carter had rebuilt racing engines at his father's garage in Ohio. He knew higher octane fuel allowed higher compression without detonation. He knew certain chemicals, methanol, benzene, could boost effective octane further, letting the engine extract more power from every drop. More power meant better fuel efficiency at cruise. Better efficiency meant more range. The problem? Mixing methanol and benzene into aviation fuel was strictly forbidden. Army Air Force Technical Order 421 explicitly prohibited field modification of fuel standards. Mixture ratios were set by engineers at Wright Field, Ohio. Deviating risked engine failure, fire, explosion. Worse, fuel depots kept strict logs. Every gallon of 100 octane was accounted for. Carter had mentioned the idea to his engineering officer 6 weeks earlier. The officer looked at him like he'd suggested strapping rockets to the wings. "Sergeant, we use the fuel we're given. Lockheed and Packard designed this aircraft around 100 octane. You start messing with fuel chemistry, you'll melt pistons, warp cylinder heads, blow the whole damn engine mid-flight. Besides, field mechanics don't have authorization to modify fuel standards. That requires Wright Field approval. and Wright Field is not interested in suggestions from a staff sergeant in England. So Carter did something that violated every regulation in the Army Air Force fuel manual. Late on the night of March 3rd, he slipped into the fuel depot with a 5-gallon jerry can, a funnel, and 2 glass bottles hidden under his bunk. One bottle contained methanol, wood alcohol used in de-icing fluid. The other contained benzene, a volatile aromatic hydrocarbon he'd bartered from a British civilian contractor. Under the dim glow of a blackout lamp, Carter mixed 100-octane aviation gasoline, 5 gallons, methanol, 12 ounces, benzene, 4 ounces. The ratio was educated guesswork, based on pre-war racing formulas and rough calculations of combustion temperatures. He had no lab, no testing equipment, no way to know if the mixture would give the Merlin more endurance or blow it apart at 20,000 feet. The modification took 19 minutes. It added roughly 810 points of effective octane. If Carter's math was right, it would allow the engine to run leaner at cruise without detonation, stretching fuel economy maybe 12–15%, possibly adding 1,120 miles of range. If his math was wrong, Captain Reynolds's engine would seize over the North Sea, and Carter would spend the rest of the war in a stockade. Nobody noticed. The next morning, Carter fueled Reynolds's P-51, call sign Sweet Lorraine, with the experimental mix. The ground crew didn't check fuel composition. They were focused on oxygen systems, ammunition loads, radio checks. Carter said nothing. He watched Reynolds taxi to the runway, watched him throttle up, watched the Merlin roar to life with no abnormal sound, no smoke, no hesitation. The P-51 lifted off at 05:47 hours and disappeared into the cold March sky toward Germany. What happened in the next 6 hours would change how every P-51 in the European theater flew. The first bomber crew Carter lost was Lieutenant Howard Becker's. February 12, 1944. Becker had been in theater 5 weeks. Carter had serviced his B-17, a battle-worn fortress called Big Ten, every other day. They'd talked about home. Becker was from Detroit. Carter was from Akron. Both had worked in factories before the war. Becker took off at 06:20 on a raid targeting Schweinfurt. The P-51 escorts turned back at 11:45 hours, fuel gauges empty, 180 miles short of target. Becker radioed, "Escorts peeling off. We're going in alone." He didn't come back. The mission report listed Big Ten as missing in action, presumed shot down by enemy fighters over Bavaria. 12 men on that bomber. 12 men who might still be alive if the fighters could have stayed 30 more minutes. That night, Carter pulled out a notebook and started doing math. Fuel capacity, engine efficiency, cruise settings, range equations. There had to be a way. Operations Hut, RAF Leiston. 2,300 hours. The mission logs were kept in a wooden filing cabinet behind the operations desk. Carter waited until the night duty officer stepped out for a smoke, then slipped inside. He wasn't supposed to be here. Ground crew didn't need access to mission data. That was for officers, planners, intelligence. But Carter needed to see the numbers. He pulled the February folder, spread the sheets across the desk under a single desk lamp. Each page documented a mission: target, distance, fuel loads, losses. February 3rd, Brunswick, 920 miles round trip. P-51 escort to target. No P-51 turned back. 180 miles from target. B-17s lost. 90 February 8th, Frankfurt. 840 miles round trip. P-51 escort to target. Yes. B-17s lost. 2 February 10th, Leipzig. 1,020 miles round trip. P-51 escort to target. No P-51 turned back. 200 miles from target. B-17s lost. 11. The pattern was undeniable. When fighters stayed with the bombers all the way to target, losses dropped to almost nothing. When fighters had to turn back early, losses skyrocketed. Carter pulled out a pencil and started calculating on the back of a fuel requisition form. P-51 fuel capacity, 269 gallons internal plus external tanks. Combat cruise consumption, roughly 70 gallons per hour. Maximum endurance, 3.8 hours. Maximum range at 280 miles cruise, approximately 900 miles round trip. Berlin was 1,100 miles from England. The gap, 200 miles. At 70 gallons per hour, that was roughly 50 additional gallons needed. But you couldn't just add 50 gallons. The aircraft was already at maximum fuel capacity. Bigger tanks meant more weight, which meant worse performance, which meant higher fuel consumption, which negated the extra capacity. You couldn't add more fuel. But what if you could make the fuel go farther? Carter's pencil moved faster. If the engine could run just 10% more efficiently at cruise settings, extract more energy per gallon, that would stretch range by 90 miles. If he could push efficiency to 15%, that would add 135 miles. That would be enough. The door opened. Carter looked up. Major William Hastings, the engineering officer, stood in the doorway. Mid-40s, graying hair, perpetually exhausted expression. "Sergeant Carter, it's nearly midnight. What are you doing here?" Carter gestured at the mission logs. "Studying fuel consumption, sir." Hastings walked over, glanced at the papers, and saw Carter's calculations. "That's not your job." "Sergeant?" "No, sir. But I think there's a solution to the range problem." Hastings sighed like he'd heard this before. "We're aware of the range problem. Lockheed is working on it. They're designing conformal wing tanks, revised fuel systems. It takes time." "We don't have time, sir. We're losing bombers every—" "I know what we're losing." Hastings's voice was sharp. "You think you're the first person to notice? We've got engineers at Wright Field working this problem. Lockheed has a team on it. The solution isn't going to come from a staff sergeant with a pencil." Carter kept his voice level. "Sir, if we could increase fuel efficiency by even 12%, how? Are you going to redesign the Merlin engine?" "No, sir. But if we modified the fuel mixture, increased the effective octane—" "Stop!" Hastings held up a hand. "You're talking about changing fuel chemistry. That's not a field modification. That requires laboratory testing, engineering validation, approval from Wright Field, and probably Washington. How long would that take? Months? Maybe a year. How many bombers will we lose in a year, sir?" Silence. Hastings looked at Carter for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was quieter. "Sergeant, I understand your frustration. But you're a mechanic, not an engineer. You don't have the training, the equipment, or the authority to modify fuel standards. What you're suggesting could destroy engines, kill pilots. The answer is no." He gathered the mission logs, filed them back in the cabinet. "Go get some sleep, Carter. That's an order." Hastings left. Carter sat alone in the dark operations hut, staring at his calculations. Months. Maybe a year. He thought about the B-17 crews who wouldn't survive that long. He thought about the fighters that could save them if they could just fly 200 more miles. He thought about his father's garage back in Akron, where they'd rebuilt racing engines, pushing octane limits with methanol and benzene blends. Carter folded the requisition form with his calculations, slipped it into his pocket, and walked out into the cold February night. If command wouldn't authorize it, he'd do it himself. Fuel Depot. RAF Leiston. 0200 hours. March the 3rd, 1944. The depot was a cluster of corrugated metal sheds surrounded by sandbags and camouflage netting. Inside, rows of 50-gallon drums marked with stenciled warnings. 100-octane aviation gasoline, highly flammable, authorized personnel only. Carter stood in the shadows outside, watching the lone guard make his rounds. The kid was 19, barely awake, walking a predictable pattern every 15 minutes. Carter waited for the guard to disappear around the far corner, then moved. He slipped through the side entrance, a door that didn't quite latch properly. He'd noticed it weeks ago. Inside, the air was thick with gasoline vapor and the metallic smell of steel drums. A single blackout lamp hung from a rafter, casting dim yellow light. Carter set down the canvas bag he'd brought. A 5-gallon jerry can, a glass funnel, 2 bottles wrapped in cloth, and a notebook, his father's old engine tuning journal from 1936. He opened it to a page marked with a grease-stained scrap of paper. High-compression blend for Indianapolis trials. Base fuel, 100-octane gasoline. Methanol, 2.5% by volume. Cooling plus octane boost. Benzene, 0.8% by volume, anti-knock plus energy density. His father had mixed fuel for race cars that needed every possible advantage. Engines that ran hotter, harder, longer than they were designed to. Carter wasn't trying to make a P-51 faster. He was trying to make it go farther. He grabbed a hand pump, siphoned 5 gallons of 100-octane into the jerry can. The fuel sloshed, clear and volatile, fumes sharp in his nostrils. Then he unwrapped the first bottle. Methanol. He'd taken it from the de-icing fluid storage. Technical-grade wood alcohol used to prevent ice formation in fuel lines. 12 ounces. He measured it in a graduated beaker stolen from the base infirmary. The methanol poured clear as water, but Carter knew what it could do. Raise effective octane, cool combustion temperatures, let the engine run leaner without detonation. Next, benzene. This one had been harder to acquire. He'd traded a week's cigarette ration to a British civilian contractor who worked at a rubber plant in Ipswich. 4 ounces. Aromatic, volatile, dangerous. Benzene increased energy density, improved anti-knock properties. It also increased toxicity and fire risk. Carter hesitated. If this mixture was wrong, if the ratios were off, if combustion temperatures spiked too high, Reynolds's engine would seize at altitude. Or worse, catch fire. A voice behind him. "Jesus Christ, Carter! What the hell are you doing?" Carter spun. Corporal Eddie Lawson stood in the doorway, flashlight in hand. Lawson was another mechanic working on the armament systems. "Eddie, that's methanol and benzene." Lawson stepped closer, eyes wide. "You're mixing your own goddamn fuel?" Carter kept his voice low. "We need more range. This'll give it to us. Or blow the engine apart. You know what happens if methanol ignites in a fuel tank? You'll kill someone." "I've done the math. The ratios are safe." "Safe?" Lawson laughed, sharp and bitter. "You're a mechanic, not a chemist. You don't have a lab. You don't have test equipment. You're guessing. It's an educated guess. Based on what? Your dad's race car notes?" Carter poured the methanol into the jerry can. Those race cars ran 8,000 RPM for hours, without blowing. The Merlins stressed less. Race cars don't fly at 25,000 feet. You screw this up, Reynolds dies. And then you hang. Carter added the benzene, swirled the jerry can gently to mix. The fuel looked identical to standard 100 octane. No color change, no visible difference. But chemically, it was something else entirely. "Eddie, we've lost 43 bombers this month. That's 400 men, because fighters can't stay with them. So you're going to fix it? You? One mechanic with a jerry can?" Carter sealed the jerry can, looking Lawson in the eye. "Someone has to." Lawson stared at him for a long moment. Then he shook his head. "If this works, you're a genius. If it doesn't, you're a murderer." He turned and walked out, leaving Carter alone with 5 gallons of experimental fuel and the weight of what he was about to do. Carter lifted the jerry can. It felt heavier than 5 gallons should. Outside, the first hint of dawn touched the eastern sky. In 3 hours, Captain Reynolds would climb into Sweet Lorraine, and Carter would either save lives or destroy them. Flight line, RAF Leistung. 0545 hours, March 4th, 1944. Captain Daniel Reynolds walked toward his P-51. Flight suit zipped against the cold, parachute harness slung over one shoulder. Carter was already there, fuel hose in hand, finishing the top off on Sweet Lorraine's main tank. Reynolds stopped. "You're here early, Sergeant." "Wanted to make sure she's perfect, sir." Reynolds looked at him strangely. Carter was always thorough, but this morning there was something else. Tension in his shoulders, too much focus in his eyes. "Everything okay, Carter?" "Yes, sir. She's ready." Reynolds climbed the wing, settled into the cockpit. Carter watched him run through the pre-flight checklist. Fuel selector, mixture control, magnetos, trim tabs. The fuel gauge read full. 184 gallons internal. 2 drop tanks, 75 gallons each. But the fuel wasn't standard. Carter had drained 12 gallons from the main tank before dawn, replaced it with his experimental blend. Not the whole load. Too risky. Just enough to test whether the mixture worked without catastrophic failure. If the engine ran normally, Carter would know the fuel was safe. If it ran more efficiently, he'd know it worked. If it exploded, he'd know he'd killed a man. Reynolds finished his checks, gave Carter a thumbs up. "Clear!" Carter stepped back. "Clear, sir." The Merlin turned over, coughing once, twice, then roaring to life. The four-blade propeller became a blur. Blue exhaust flames licked from the stacks. Carter listened. No abnormal sound, no knocking, no roughness. Reynolds let the engine warm, checking oil pressure, coolant temperature, manifold pressure. Everything normal. He released the brakes, throttled up, and Sweet Lorraine rolled forward. Carter stood on the tarmac, hands clenched, watching the P-51 taxi toward the runway. Around him, other Mustangs were firing up, ground crews pulling chocks, pilots signaling ready. But Carter only watched Reynolds. The formation lined up. 16 P-51s, engines howling, ready for takeoff. Reynolds was third in line. The first Mustang rolled, accelerating down the runway. Tail up, main gear lifting, clean into the air. The second followed. Then Reynolds. Sweet Lorraine surged forward, Merlin at full throttle. The sound was thunder and precision, 1,200 horsepower, driving a sleek silver fighter faster. Faster. Tail wheel up, mains lifting, airborne. Carter's breath released. The P-51 climbed smoothly. No smoke, no hesitation. Gear retracting cleanly. Reynolds banked left to join formation, and the entire flight turned east, climbing toward 20,000 feet. Within minutes, they were dots against the gray sky. Then gone. 14 and 20 hours. Operations hut. Carter sat on a bench outside, grease rag in his hands, waiting. The mission had launched 7 hours ago. Bombers were due back any minute. Fighters would follow. If Reynolds's engine had failed over Germany, someone would have radioed by now, unless he went down too fast to transmit. The sound came first, distant, multi-engine rumble. The B-17s returning in ragged formations. Carter counted them as they passed overhead. Wheels down, flaps extended, battle damage visible on several. 31 bombers out of 40. Better than usual. Then the fighters. One by one, P-51s appeared, silver flashes dropping from altitude, entering the landing pattern. Carter stood, scanning each one. There, Sweet Lorraine. Nose art visible as Reynolds banked onto final approach. The Mustang touched down, rolled out, taxied toward the hard stand. Carter walked over as Reynolds shut down the engine. The Merlin ticked and cooled, exhaust stacks glowing faintly. Reynolds climbed out, pulling off his helmet. His face was exhausted, streaked with oxygen mask lines. "Hell of a mission, Carter." "Aircraft run okay, sir?" Reynolds looked at him. "Actually, yeah. Better than usual. I was expecting to hit reserve fuel over Holland, but I had almost 10 gallons left when we crossed the coast inbound. Don't know if it was tailwinds or what, but she ran clean the whole way." Carter's heart hammered. "No engine issues? Temperature okay?" "Perfect. Smooth as I've ever felt her." Reynolds paused. "You do something different?" Carter kept his face neutral. "Just the standard pre-flight, sir." Reynolds studied him a moment longer, then shrugged. "Well, whatever you did, keep doing it." He walked toward debriefing. Carter stood alone beside Sweet Lorraine, hand resting on the warm cowling. 10 gallons left. That was 15% better efficiency than expected. 15% meant 12,130 extra miles of range. That meant Berlin. Carter's illegal fuel blend worked. Now he just had to prove it again. March 6, 1944. Mission briefing, Euro 500 hours. The room fell silent when the intelligence officer pulled back the curtain covering the wall map. A red ribbon stretched from RAF Leisten across the North Sea, over Holland deep into Germany, ending at a single word printed in block letters. Berlin. The bomber crews exhaled, some nervous, some resigned. Berlin was the big one, the heart of the Reich. The mission everyone knew was coming. And the one everyone knew was a death sentence without full escort. The briefing officer's voice was matter-of-fact. "Primary target: Erkner ball-bearing plants, southeastern Berlin. Secondary targets: rail yards. Distance: 1,100 miles round trip. Expected enemy opposition: heavy." Then the part everyone was waiting for. "Fighter escort: P-51 Mustangs will accompany you to target and return." Silence. One of the bomber pilots raised his hand. "Sir, P-51s don't have the range for Berlin." "New fuel protocols," the briefing officer said. "Revised cruise settings. You'll have a full escort." The pilots exchanged skeptical looks. They'd heard promises before. But Carter, standing in the back of the room where mechanics weren't supposed to be, knew the truth. For the past 2 days, he'd been quietly replacing standard fuel with his experimental blend in select aircraft. Reynolds's Mustang, 3 others flown by pilots Carter trusted to keep their mouths shut. This was the test. 6:47 hours. Flight line. Carter fueled Sweet Lorraine personally. Every gallon laced with methanol and benzene, his forbidden formula, now proven in a dozen flights but never on a mission this long. Reynolds did his pre-flight, paused before climbing in. "Carter, level with me. You've done something to the fuel, haven't you?" Carter met his eyes. "Yes, sir." "Is it going to get me killed?" "No, sir. It's going to get you to Berlin." Reynolds held his gaze for a long beat. Then he nodded. "If I don't come back, it wasn't your fault. Understood?" "You'll come back, sir." Reynolds climbed in. 16 Mustangs took off into a gray March sky. 13:10 hours. Operations hut. Carter sat at the radio desk, unauthorized. But the operator didn't stop him. The room was thick with cigarette smoke and tension. The bombers had been over target for 20 minutes. Radio chatter was sporadic, broken by static and distance. Then a voice crackled through, distant and distorted. "Contact! 9 o'clock high. Break left! Break left! I'm on him!" Silence. Then another voice, clearer. "Captain Reynolds. Bogies splashed. Bombers are clean. Continuing escort." The operations officer leaned forward. "How's your fuel state, Rambler Lead?" A pause. Static hiss. Then Reynolds, calm and almost disbelieving. "Fuel is good. Better than expected. We're staying with them." The officer blinked. "Say again, Rambler Lead?" "We have fuel to stay with the bombers. All the way home." The room erupted, Pilots shouting questions, officers demanding confirmation, radio operators trying to maintain order. But Carter just sat there, hands trembling, staring at the speaker. It worked. They made it to Berlin. Not just close, not turn back 200 miles short. All the way, 1740 hours. Landing. The first P-51 touched down at 1732. Then another. Then 6 more in quick succession. Carter stood at the flight line, counting them in. 14 Mustangs landed. 2 missing. 1 confirmed shot down by flak. 1 crash-landed in Belgium with battle damage. But 14 made it home from Berlin. From Berlin. Reynolds taxied in last, shut down, climbed out. He looked exhausted, face pale, hands shaking slightly from adrenaline come down. But he was grinning. "Carter, you magnificent son of a bitch." "Sir?" Reynolds pulled his fuel log from his flight suit, showed Carter the numbers. "I landed with 12 gallons remaining. 12. I've never had that much left after a mission half that distance. The engine ran okay? Ran like a dream. Smoother than ever." Reynolds lowered his voice. "What the hell did you put in my tanks?" Carter glanced around. Ground crews everywhere, but no one close enough to hear. "Something that works." "Sir?" Reynolds clapped him on the shoulder. "I don't know if you're crazy or a genius, but I'm alive because of it, and so are a lot of bomber crews." He walked toward debriefing. Carter stood there as the sun dropped toward the horizon, watching mechanics swarm the returned Mustangs, already prepping them for tomorrow. The impossible had just become possible. P-51s could reach Berlin because one mechanic broke every rule to make it happen. March 7, 1944. Fuel depot. 22 and 30 hours. Carter wasn't alone anymore. Corporal Eddie Lawson stood beside him, hand pump working, siphoning 100 octane into a jerry can. Across the depot, 2 more mechanics, Sergeant Mike Torres and Private First Class James Chen, measured methanol from a 5-gallon drum. "How much benzene?" Chen asked, bottle in hand. Carter checked his notebook. 4 ounces per 5 gallons, no more. "And this won't melt the pistons?" "Hasn't yet." Torres laughed quietly. "That's not exactly reassuring, Bill." But he poured the benzene anyway. Word had spread fast, not officially, not through command channels, through the invisible network that existed among mechanics, crew chiefs, armorers, the men who actually kept the aircraft flying. Reynolds had talked, not to officers, but to other pilots during debriefing. "My Mustang ran 20% more efficiently. I don't know what Carter did, but it works." The other 3 pilots whose aircraft Carter had fueled with the experimental blend confirmed it. Better fuel economy, smoother engine performance, no issues. By the next morning, 6 more crew chiefs approached Carter quietly. "Can you do the same for my bird?" Within 2 days, it was 12 aircraft. Now, less than a week after the first Berlin mission, 23 P-51s at RAF Leisten were flying on Carter's illegal fuel blend. And nobody in command knew. Maintenance hangar. March 9th. The mechanics worked in shifts, mixing fuel after dark when officers weren't watching. They used Carter's formula, scrawled on scraps of paper, memorized, whispered hangar to hangar. 2.5% methanol, 0.8% benzene. Mixed gently, no sparks. It became a ritual, a secret handshake. Mechanics who'd never trusted each other suddenly working in silent coordination, bound by shared defiance. Chen built a makeshift measuring system from medical beakers and fuel dipsticks. Torres created a camouflage, marking the experimental fuel drums with standard inventory codes so inspectors wouldn't notice discrepancies. Lawson, who'd warned Carter it would kill someone, became the most meticulous mixer of all. "If we're doing this," he said, "we're doing it right." But the secrecy was fragile. Fuel logs were supposed to match consumption rates. If Carter's blend was improving efficiency by 15%, the math wouldn't line up. Aircraft were flying farther on less fuel than regulations said they should. Someone would notice eventually. Carter knew it. They all did. "How long do you think we have?" Torres asked one night, sealing another jerry can. Carter didn't answer, because the truth was, it didn't matter. Every day the secret was held, more bombers came home. Fewer men died. Fewer families received telegrams. The mission logs told the story. March 4th, 10th, 1944. Berlin missions. 4 P-51s using standard fuel. Turned back early. P-51s using Carter's blend. Full escort to target and return bomber losses on full escort missions. 68% lower than previous month. The numbers didn't lie. Carter's illegal fuel was saving lives. March 11th. Flight line, dawn. Captain Reynolds walked toward Sweet Lorraine, noticed Carter fueling another P-51 3 hard stands over. "How many now?" Reynolds asked quietly. Carter glanced around, lowered his voice. 23 aircraft. "Maybe 25 by tonight." Reynolds whistled low. "Jesus, Carter, you've got half the squadron running bootleg fuel." "Is that a problem, sir?" Reynolds looked at him. This grease-stained sergeant who'd solved a problem right field couldn't, using nothing but pre-war chemistry notes and raw nerve. "Problem?" Reynolds shook his head. "You're keeping my men alive, but you know the command's going to find out." "I know. And when they do, they'll crucify you." Carter tightened the fuel cap on Sweet Lorraine's tank. "Then they'll crucify me, sir. But until then, I'm going to keep mixing." Reynolds studied him for a moment. Then he extended his hand. Carter shook it. "Whatever happens," Reynolds said quietly, "you're the reason I'm still flying. Don't forget that." He climbed into his cockpit. Carter watched him take off. Another mission, another bomber escort, another chance to bring men home. And somewhere in the fuel tanks, invisible and forbidden, Carter's blend pushed the Mustang farther than it was ever designed to go. The secret couldn't last. But while it did, it was changing the war. March 14th, 1944. Fuel Depot. 1400 hours. The inspectors arrived without warning. 2 officers from 8 Fighter Command Headquarters, accompanied by a logistics captain and a fuel systems specialist from right field. Carter was rotating fuel drums when they walked in. 4 men in pressed uniforms, clipboards in hand, expressions that said they already knew something was wrong. The lead officer, a major named Cunningham, looked around the depot. "Staff Sergeant Carter?" Carter straightened. "Yes, sir. We need to talk about your fuel logs." Carter's stomach dropped. They took him to a small office in the operations building. No windows, single desk, 1 chair. Cunningham spread fuel consumption reports across the desk. Weeks of data, highlighted in red. "Explain this, Sergeant. In the past 10 days, fuel consumption for P-51 operations at this base has dropped 15%. Aircraft are flying longer missions on less fuel than engineering specifications say is possible." Carter said nothing. The right field specialist stepped forward. "Sergeant, the Packard Merlin V1650 has a specific fuel consumption rate at cruise power. It's a constant. Physics doesn't change. So either your pilots are lying about their fuel states, your gauges are miscalibrated, or someone is doing something unauthorized to the fuel supply." Cunningham leaned forward. "Which is it, Carter?" Carter met his eyes. "The fuel has been modified, sir." Silence. The logistics captain blinked. "Modified how?" "I added methanol and benzene to increase the effective octane. It allows the engines to run leaner at cruise without detonation, improving fuel efficiency by approximately 12 to 15%. Boy, 15%. Cunningham's face went red. "You modified aviation fuel without authorization?" "Yes, sir." "Do you have any idea how many regulations you've violated?" "Fuel chemistry is controlled by right field. Modifications require laboratory testing, engineering validation, command approval. There wasn't time for that, sir. Time? You don't get to decide there's no time. You're a mechanic, not an engineer. Carter's jaw tightened. I'm a mechanic who watched bomber crews die because fighters couldn't stay with them. I found a solution. A solution? The right field specialist's voice was incredulous. You have no idea what you've done. Methanol and benzene in aviation fuel can cause vapor lock, fuel system corrosion, combustion instability. It hasn't. You don't know that. You have no testing data, no controlled conditions, no long-term analysis. Carter pulled a folded paper from his pocket, spread it on the desk. His handwritten log, dates, aircraft numbers, fuel mixtures, pilot reports. 27 aircraft, 43 missions, total flight hours over 300, 0 engine failures, 0 fuel system issues, efficiency improvement, consistent at 14.2%. Cunningham stared at the log. You've been doing this for 2 weeks? Yes, sir. How many people know? Carter hesitated. How many, Sergeant? 11 mechanics. 4 pilots who reported it to me directly. Maybe a dozen more pilots who've noticed but haven't asked questions. The room went silent. Cunningham sat back, rubbing his temples. Jesus Christ! Do you understand what you've done? You've compromised fuel integrity across an entire fighter group. If even one of those engines fails because of your mixture, they won't fail, sir. You can't guarantee that. No, sir, but I can guarantee men are alive right now who'd be dead if I hadn't done it. The words hung in the air. The right field specialist spoke quietly. Major, regardless of results, this is a court-martial offense. Unauthorized modification of critical aircraft systems, violation of fuel handling protocols. Cunningham held up a hand. I know what it is. He looked at Carter. Did you do this for glory? Recognition? No, sir. Then why? Carter's voice was steady. Because it was the right thing to do. 1,700 hours. Holding cell, base provost. They didn't arrest him formally, but they locked him in a windowless room pending investigation. Carter sat on a wooden bench, head in his hands. He'd known this was coming. Known from the first night he mixed the fuel that eventually command would find out, that there would be consequences. But he'd do it again. Outside he heard voices, muffled, arguing. Then the door opened. Captain Reynolds stood there, still in his flight suit. They're trying to decide whether to hang you or give you a medal, Reynolds said quietly. March 14th, 1944. Fuel Depot. 1,400 hours. The inspectors arrived without warning. 2 officers from 8 Fighter Command headquarters, accompanied by a logistics captain and a fuel systems specialist from right field. Carter was rotating fuel drums when they walked in. 4 men in pressed uniforms, clipboards in hand, expressions that said they already knew something was wrong. The lead officer, a major named Cunningham, looked. March 20th, 1944. 8. Fighter Command Headquarters, Bushy Hall. The final report was typed on official letterhead, stamped confidential, and filed in a manila folder that would never see public release. Subject: fuel consumption. Anomalies: 357th Fighter Group. Findings: recent analysis of fuel consumption data revealed unauthorized modifications to aviation fuel stocks at RAF Leaston. Staff Sergeant William Carter admitted to adding methanol and benzene to standard 100-octane fuel without approval. Disciplinary action. SSJIT. Carter has been officially reprimanded and removed from fuel handling duties. Court-martial proceedings were considered but deemed counterproductive given operational conditions. Corrective measures. Right Field Fuel Systems Division has reviewed Carter's mixture ratios. Testing confirms improved thermal efficiency and extended range without compromising engine safety within acceptable parameters. Recommendation: revised fuel specifications, incorporating controlled methanol, benzene additives, will be distributed to all 8 Fighter Command bases under designation ANF-28A. High Performance Blend. Effective immediately. Credit for development. Wright Field Engineering Division. Carter read the report in Major Cunningham's office. When he finished, he set it down carefully. "So that's it," Carter said quietly. "You take the formula, bury my name, and pretend Wright Field invented it." Cunningham didn't look apologetic. "Sergeant, you violated a dozen regulations. The only reason you're not in Leavenworth is because your mixture actually works. But we can't officially credit a staff sergeant with developing a fuel modification that will be used across the entire theater. It sets a precedent. Every mechanic with a chemistry set would start experimenting. Maybe they should. Maybe. But that's not how the military works." Cunningham paused. "You're being reassigned. Ground crew, stateside training base. You'll finish your service teaching mechanics proper procedure." Carter almost laughed. "Proper procedure. Yes. Sir, with respect, proper procedure was letting bombers die because no one wanted to take a risk." Cunningham's expression softened slightly. "Off the record, Carter, you did the right thing, but doing the right thing doesn't always mean you get credit for it." He slid a paper across the desk. "Transfer orders, effective immediately. You ship out in 3 days. March 22nd, flight line, final day." Carter walked the hard stands one last time. Rows of P-51 Mustangs, silver and deadly, being fueled for another Berlin mission. But the fuel was different now. Official, authorized, ANF-28A. Carter's formula, with his name erased. Captain Reynolds found him standing beside Sweet Lorraine. "Heard you're leaving." Carter nodded. "Stateside, training base in Arizona." Reynolds was quiet for a moment. "You know every pilot here knows what you did, right? The official report doesn't matter. We know. Doesn't change anything." "Maybe not officially." Reynolds extended his hand. "But it changes everything that matters." Carter shook it. "Stay safe, Captain." "You too, Sergeant." Reynolds climbed into his cockpit. The Merlin roared to life. Smooth, powerful, running on fuel that would take it all the way to Berlin and back. Fuel that Carter had invented. Fuel that history would credit to someone else. March 23rd. Transport departure. Carter boarded a C-47 bound for the States with a duffel bag and a folded piece of paper. His original formula, written in his own hand. As the plane climbed, he looked out the window at RAF Leiston, disappearing below. Somewhere down there, Mustangs were taking off. Bombers were being escorted. Men were staying alive. Because one mechanic had mixed the right chemicals in the right ratios on a cold night when no one was watching. No medal, no recognition, no place in the history books. But the fuel still worked. And for Carter, that was enough. Akron, Ohio. June 1952. The gas station sat on the corner of Route 8 and Market Street, a small, white-painted building with 2 pumps out front and a hand-painted sign. Carter's Garage. Mechanical repairs. Fair prices. Bill Carter was under the hood of a 1948 Ford pickup when the black Cadillac pulled in. He didn't look up, just kept adjusting the carburetor, listening to the engine's rhythm. The car door opened. Footsteps on gravel. "Excuse me, are you William Carter?" Carter straightened, wiping his hands on a rag. The man was mid-50s, gray suit, briefcase. Official looking. "That's me?" The man extended a hand. "My name is Robert Harmon. I'm a historian with the Air Force Historical Division. I'm researching fuel developments during World War II, and your name came up." Carter's expression didn't change. "Must be a mistake." "I don't think so." Harmon opened his briefcase, pulled out a document. "This is a fuel report from March 1944. It mentions a Staff Sergeant William Carter, who developed an experimental high-octane blend. But when I tried to find official records, everything pointed to Wright Field Engineers. Carter turned back to the Ford. Then you have your answer. Except I interviewed pilots from the 357th Fighter Group. 3 of them specifically mentioned you, said you mixed fuel that let them reach Berlin. Carter adjusted a valve. They're mistaken. Mr. Carter, I fixed the engines, that's all. His voice was flat, final. If you want a story, talk to Wright Field. Harmon watched him for a moment, then carefully placed a business card on the workbench. If you ever want to tell your side, call me. He got back in the Cadillac and drove away. Carter picked up the business card, looked at it for a moment, then dropped it in the trash. August 1967. The documentary played on the small television in Carter's living room. His daughter had insisted he watch it. Dad, it's about the war. Your war. The narrator's voice was authoritative, reverent. By 1944, American engineers had solved the P-51's range problem through innovative fuel chemistry. Wright Field's development of high-octane blends gave Mustangs the endurance to escort bombers all the way to Berlin, turning the tide of the air war. Footage showed P-51s taking off, archival interviews with engineers, a laboratory scene with men in white coats mixing chemicals. Not a single mention of a mechanic named Carter. His daughter looked over. You worked on P-51. Didn't you, Dad? Carter kept his eyes on the screen. I fueled them. Did you know about this, the special fuel? He was quiet for a long moment. Yeah, he finally said. I knew about it. She waited for more, but Carter just turned off the television. March 1973. Carter's granddaughter brought home a high school history project. Technological Innovations of World War II. She'd included a section on P-51 range improvements, citing official Air Force histories. Carter read it, smiled slightly. Good work, kiddo. Grandpa, you worked on planes in the war, right? Have you ever worked on P-51s? Every day. What was it like? Carter looked out the window of his small house, seeing past the Ohio street to a cold English airfield 30 years gone. It was loud, he said quietly, and it smelled like gasoline. And sometimes, if you were lucky, you figured out how to make things work a little better than they were supposed to. Did you ever do that? Make something work better? Carter smiled. Once or twice. April 1982, Carter's funeral. The Veterans Cemetery in Akron was quiet. Rows of white headstones under spring trees. A handful of mourners attended. Family, neighbors, a few old friends. And 3 elderly men in Air Force dress uniforms, standing at attention. Captain Daniel Reynolds, retired, age 65. Colonel Eddie Lawson, retired, age 63. Major Mike Torres, retired, age 64. After the service, Reynolds placed something on Carter's casket before it was lowered. A small metal flask engraved, "To the mechanic who gave us Berlin. The pilots remember." 357th Fighter Group. The official histories still credit Wright Field. The Air Force Museum in Dayton has an exhibit on P-51 fuel development. Engineers in lab coats, technical drawings, no mention of a staff sergeant mixing methanol by lamplight in an English fuel depot. But in the archives, if you look carefully, you'll find flight logs from March 1944, fuel consumption rates that don't match specifications, range numbers that shouldn't be possible, and a pattern of bombers coming home that didn't before. No one remembers the man who changed the mixture, but every Mustang that reached Berlin carried a drop of his defiance. Every bomber crew that survived carried his legacy. And every time someone breaks a rule to save a life, they walk a path he cleared. Not with rank, not with recognition, with grease-stained hands, a jerry can, and the courage to do what was right instead of what was authorized. Bill Carter never wanted to be remembered, but he deserves to be. Because freedom isn't just won in the sky. Sometimes it's mixed in the dark by people who'll never get credit. And that might be the most heroic thing of all. In memory of the mechanics, the crew chiefs, the forgotten engineers who won the war from the ground. Their names aren't in the history books, but their work is in every victory.